Hey everyone, and welcome to this next step in our progression and multiplication. Today we're going to be talking about estimating products. So as always, let's kind of talk about like what those words even mean, right? So remember estimation, like we kind of cover this every unit. So let's make sure again we're connecting and thinking, oh, estimation, right? That first word, it does not start with a B. That first word that comes to mind is about, right? That's where we're at. We're about. As soon as I see estimation, I want to think about. And that's also a really key word if you're doing like a story problem or a word problem and you see the word about, then you're like, oh, I'm estimating, right? So as soon as we think about that, then we can think about that to estimate, we round. And in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to round using our compatible numbers, right? And those are numbers that work well in our head numbers. Okay, so today we're going to be thinking about how we can estimate products. And again, remember products, that's just the answer to an multiplication problem. All right, excuse me, man, can't talk today apparently. All right, so we are going to be thinking about today, how do we take multiplication problems, round them, and get an answer that's close? I mean, that's really what it's all about. So of course, let's just dive in and play the game. So I don't know, someone says 538 and times 7, and they're like, hey, I need an estimation. And you say, hey, estimation. First thing that comes to mind is the word about. Yay, if I'm thinking about, I'm going to round, right? So that's going to be our first step here. So step 1, round. And remember that this is a front end estimation, a front end rounding process that we've talked about in previous units. So again, I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to start at the first place value or the highest place value. You'll see, depends how you're reading the number. Obviously, we read left to right when we're looking at numbers. So I'm going to find my place. I'm going to look next door, 5 or more. I'm going to add one more. And this, of course, makes sense because 583 does round to 600. It's closer to 600 than it is to 500. And then, you know, something to always keep in mind, if I have a single digit number, I'm not going to round it. There's really no reason to round single digit numbers. So that doesn't do us any good. It doesn't give us good estimations at all. So yeah, we just keep the single digit as is. And then what's cool about this is now we set up our problem to look just like all that work we've been doing with base 10 multiplication. And that's what we're going to do, right? We're going to use that base 10 multiplication. So base 10 multiply. And that's that process again where I'm going to underline my non-zeros. 6 times 7, well, that equals 42. Then I'm going to count my place values or my zeros. So I have 1, 2. So I have 1, 2 here. So 583 times 7 is about 4,200. Again, remember, estimation is all about helping us check our answers. So like if I had to go do the math of 583 times 7, which we're not going to today, we're just estimating. But if I did, then if I had an answer that was close to 4,200, I'd know I'm doing good and I move on. If I had an answer that was like 42 million, then I know that I made a mistake somewhere with my place values, right? And I can go back and fix that. Okay, so let's continue to practice this process. So another number, let's say 300 or 3,952, and we're multiplying that by 76. Okay, so again, step 1, I'm going to round, right? So again, use that front end rounding. So boom and boom. And I go over here, find my place, add one more, which makes sense. 3,952 is closer to 4,000 than it is to 3,000. And here, again, I'm rounding up. So that would be 80, which makes sense. 76 is closer to 80 than it is to 70. Okay, and now we just do our base 10 multiplication. So we're just going to multiply. So underline, right? 4 times 8, that's 32. But it's not 4, it's 4,000. So that's 3 zeros. And it's not 8, it's 80. So that's another 0. So 3 zeros plus 1 more 0 is 4 total zeros. So I just need 4 zeros on my answer. 1, 2, 3, comma, and there you have it. If I was to take 9,000, or excuse me, 3,952 and multiply it by 76, I'll have an answer that's pretty close to 320,000. Cool. This estimating bit really isn't that rough, right? It's like, oh, yeah, round, then use those numbers that are compatible, those numbers that are easy to work with, and then count my zeros. So why don't we just do another one? Let's do like two digits. So like 82 times 59. All right. So yeah, front end estimation. Nothing changes here. All right. Find my place, look next door, 4 or less, let it rest, which makes sense because 82 rounds to 80 before it rounds to 90. Right? If you're 82, you're closer to being 80 years old than you are to 90 years old. That's another way I always think about it. Or money, right? If I have $59, well, that's closer to 60 bucks as opposed to 50 bucks. Okay, and then let's go ahead and use that base 10 multiplication skill. So 8 times 6 or 6 times 8, that's 48. I like that one. It's not 8, it's 80, so that's 10 times bigger, so that's 1 0. And it's not 6, it's 60, so that's 10 times bigger, so that's a second 0. So 2 zeros, right, would get me on my end, and my answer is 4,800, or I should say about 4,800. Cool. Well, I mean, let's do this. So I always like this one. Let's, I'm gonna throw a bunch of problems down right now. And what I want you to do is go ahead and pause the video and see if you can solve these. I'm gonna do one more. Let's do something in the thousands and something in the hundreds. Okay, so go ahead and pause this video, go do these problems, come back, let's see how we did. And you're back. So you paused it, you solved these, you did your best. Now let's follow along together and see what we can do. So step 1, right, do my rounding. So 538 rounds to 500. This is 4 or less, so I'm letting it rest. And this also is 4 or less, so I'm letting it rest. So this rounds to 60. So I have 500 times 60. Cool. So let's do that. Base 10. So 5 times 6. This one's tricky, right? This is where sometimes we get confused with zeros. 5 times 6 is 30. That's why I always write down that number first. And now I'm going to count my zeros. And notice I still have 3 more zeros. 1, 1, 2, 3. So 1, 2, 3. So this answer is about 30,000. Okay, so remember when you multiply those two numbers and sometimes they end with a 0, that's fine. You just don't count that when you start counting your zeros. Just write it down and then put your zeros in. Okay, so here we go. Let's do our next one. So 798, well, that's 800. It's going to round to 800 right away, right? Again, if you need to, 5 or more, add 1 more. And this 5 or more, add 1 more. That's going to round to 20. So we multiply, and here we go. 8 times 2 is going to get me 16, and then 1, 2, 3 zeros, 1, 2, 3 zeros. So 16,000. So 798 times 15 is about 16,000. All right, here we go. So find my place, look next door, that's 5 or more, add 1 more. So this is going to be about 6,000, which again makes sense. 5,700 is closer to 6,000 than it is to 5,000. And then let's see, multiply that by 693. Well, that's going to be 700. I really don't even have to think about rounding that. Again, thinking how close it is to the next 100, right? I only need 7 more to get to 700. Or I would have to subtract 93 to get to 600. And it's a lot easier to add 7 than it is to subtract 93, right? Like that's why it's closer. Okay, so base 10 multiplication, 6 times 7, that gets me 42. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 zeros. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Wow. So that actually will get me close to what, 4 million? Dang, that's a big number. Cool. All right. Well, here's our job. This is what we're doing. This is that whole idea, again, of what we talked about at the very beginning of how we estimate products, right? Estimation, about, round. Use that front end rounding or front end estimation to get those numbers that are compatible, where it's really just a single digit and then zeros, because then we can use our base 10 multiplication to find our product, right? The answer. So I hope this comes in handy. I look forward to seeing what you do with this with your assignments. If you have any questions, ask. As always, thank you for being here. Thank you for working hard, and we will see you again shortly.